we are going to be describing for you current events, but in a completely boring and uninteresting way, because if I was interesting, if I told you even 1/10 of what I would like to tell you, then we wouldn't have a channel anymore. And that's the sad reason. But what I'd like to do today is go right up to the line. Let's see if I can not get taken down. Let's see if I can talk about some stuff that's just going to be boring and So we are going through what I would call a global, very acrimonious divorce. And specifically, what I'm looking for here is for you to understand how real this is. How many channels that talk exactly the kind of stuff that you guys want me to talk about have been wiped away by making very, very simple mistakes that you only get one chance to make by simply talking about things that are true, or at least, and I really, really hope that this global, easy to understand mystery does not elude you, that you're not fooled by what has been going on here. Because, in my opinion, we are dealing with an outrageous, outrageous level of deception. And this is a deception that is staggering to the imagination. It is a deception that once fully understood and appreciated for what it was, what the collective they says. We get all excited about what they think and what they say, and we feel in our educational system that you're given a particular task and you have a certain number of days to perform that task, and if you don't do it by a certain amount of time, then you're a failure and you get an F. F means that you have incorrect information in your mind. And you also are said to have graded poorly in the class. You had poor grades. Well, poor means that you don't have money. And if you get enough Fs, then you have to repeat a grade, and you don't get to have your friends anymore, and you're ostracized. And I'm sure a lot of this audience has had stuff like this happen to them. It is a very, and we can speculate about that, or we were able to speculate about that. Now we really can't speculate about that. It's just a fact that you are not allowed to think certain thoughts, or at least there's someone who is acting in a really buffoonish way to try to make it so that you can't think certain thoughts. And how are we on streaming now? Is everybody happy? It's iffy? How iffy is iffy? Is anybody able to get a good show?
I've got one assistant telling me it's fine. I've got another assistant telling me that it's buffering. And
okay. So folks, this is a high intensity live stream. Not getting it good is probably because you gotta knock down my bandwidth on your machine in your browser, because you might not have the support to live stream at this speed. If you have a high speed internet, you probably are going to be fine. That's my guess. So we're not going to worry about that anymore. We're not going to talk about it anymore. We're just going to do the show. Because some people are getting this right. So if you don't have enough bandwidth, I do apologize. Anyway, what we're dealing with here, to me, is egregious. It's very upsetting. Several people who I have consulted from, you get to let your facial hair grow as long as you like. But that's another story. So when you really look at what's happening here, going back to the slide again, I think this is a global, very acrimonious divorce. And why do I say that? I say that because when we are looking at how this works, when we're looking at how a divorce plays out, there are different types of divorces that can happen. There are peaceful divorces where people, custody battles involved. There may be extraordinary fights over money. Okay? And at the same time that this global divorce is going on, there is a very bizarre apparatus in place that wants you to not be aware that this divorce is even really happening. Or, as in the case of many family situations, and this creates a great deal of stress on the child, particularly when the child is being told information that is negative about the other parent by one of the parents. When one of the parents commits to hate and negativity for a consistent period of time, okay, then you have a situation where the child begins to develop. There is an acrimonious divorce going on, and the child is given two sets of information from both parents. The parents, in other words, in an ideal divorce, the parents do not talk badly about the other parent to the children at all. They handle it. They say, we're working it all out, and we're going to, get this resolved. But you don't drag the kids through your personal dirty laundry. Well, that is not what is happening. And so what I've learned in the UFO community is a radical transformation of the basic quality of life that we all thought that we could enjoy. We're seeing some very, very aggressive, let me try to get that shirt out of there. We're seeing some very, very aggressive moves being made here. And we're seeing a very, very acrimonious divorce breaking out into the open. Now, if you think that I'm talking about the first debate, no, I mean, that kind of is an example of it. And the way George Norrie has been doing this since, 2001, 2002, a long, long time ago. We'll just say 20 years, okay? George has basically been doing this for 20 years. You don't ever see George go online and engage with anybody who is trying to stir up trouble against him, trying to call him names, of which there are many, trying to attack his credibility, trying to attack him for any of a number of reasons. George doesn't get involved. And I'll just give you a little insider tip here. If you talk to anybody who knows how to advise you if your career is starting to go somewhere and you're starting to get real public attention, which I have seen over and over again, people go from a normal platform where they're just sharing information to an attack platform where they begin naming names and they begin singling people out and they begin driving a narrative. And in fact, my wife and I both have been subject to this on an unimaginable scale. And so, for your own sanity, you reach a point where you have to disengage and you can't participate. And so again, I apologize that I've been so out of the loop here. But again, there are situations taking place on these platforms right now where certain opinions will lead to, I guess I'm up to 434,000 subscribers or something like that, gone. In the UFO community, what I've consistently noticed is that when people pivot to an attack platform, that's when their audience numbers die off, that's when people stop paying attention, that's when they tune you out. And so the real key is stop projecting negativity about your other, in this case, opponent, right? Stop projecting negativity about your opponent and actually focus on your message. Focus on what you are supposed to do. So these are the guidelines that I already follow. I've occasionally spoken about the horrendous opposition that we have online, but I really don't. Because it's not going to enhance your life very much unless you're, really into the trivia and you like hearing whining and complaining. But, so anyway, what I've learned is that there is an optics aspect to doing a good job when you're a public figure. And the trick is, we're not trying to stop you from having freedom of speech. We're not trying to stop you from thinking your own thoughts. And don't try to stop us from thinking our own thoughts. And don't try to restrict our free speech. And if you come into our private areas, if you come into a YouTube group or a Twitter post or whatever, that's a private forum. And so, yes, we do reserve the right to moderate because we have some very disruptive activity that takes place. Is there something you'd like to say? Okay.
Sacred boundaries.
Yeah, sacred boundaries. So, I would just, let's just say this hypothetically, okay? If you want to win an election, you probably don't want to be overly dissing your opponent. Because when I've seen how this plays out in the microculture of the UFO community, when you go onto an attack platform, when you start hitting everybody, pretty soon it's obvious if everybody around you is the jerk, then guess who's the a-hole, right? I do believe that there is a similar thing going on here. If you look at what's happened in our media, we've had 5 years, really, 5 years of this unrelenting drive to force you, to literally force you to hate one person. And that's really bizarre. I don't think that's ever happened before, where you have this apparent voice of the collective, and remember again, you're graded in school upon the accuracy of the information in your mind, so if you have inaccurate information, then you have a poor grade. And poor is a word that's associated with not having money. So literally, if you don't have correct information, the world tells you that you're subject to poverty, you could go back a grade, you could fail, you're a failure. So there's this thing that a lot of people have gotten conditioned in them, that the voice of the collective must be right. And I have railed on this for years, how often we lean on the word they. Well, they say this, and they say that, and they say. Well, who is they? And who gets to control the power of the word they? That is the all-important power. And what is very interesting is that the assumptions that some in certain age demographics, particularly the older demographics, would believe, that nobody could even believe it's possible that an entire apparatus with all of these different divisions could turn against one person like this so resolutely, and then to actually have the entire thing, or at least a significant majority of it, be completely based in falsehoods. It's actually hilarious. The utter childishness of what has been going on. The lack of a single burst of delicious oxygen to this negativity that has gone on for 5 years, that it never frickin' stops. And we have seen one thing after another, after another, after another come up that have later been disproven. And there's so many examples that it's mind-boggling. And did you ever hear about the idea that there's 5 corporations that apparently are running everything? Did you ever hear about the idea that this 5 corporate monster has thousands and thousands of heads, thousands and thousands of print that went? I think it was almost 40M or something like that, 40 million. It was very large, and it was right up there with like other people who had been, heads of state in America and elsewhere before. It was that large, comparable. I mentioned this, and 2 days later it was down to 225,000. And I've shown you this already if you went back and watched my videos. That was last February of 2019. Now when that happened, I said to myself, how in the hell did they make this many videos disappear so fast? And if that's possible, then anything is possible. And if you think that the destruction of channels and their content on these different platforms is in any way beneficial to you, that you're being protected somehow, I think you're cool enough to encounter information that you don't like and decide not to read it. I think you're cool enough to make up your own mind, to read something and then discern facts for yourself. I think you have that ability. And it saddens me greatly that that ability is being taken from you, because if you remember, I wrote a full free ebook last year on my website, divinecosmos.com, DIVINECOSMOS.com. This is a free full-length book called D-Class, D-E-C-L-A-S. You can go right on that website and find it right away. And in that book, in one of the sections, I talk about other types of content that were targeted the same way. And would it surprise you if you went back and read that and looked at the proof? Because again, these are provable facts. Would it surprise you that there were dozens and dozens of channels focusing on things like organic food and healthy eating and taking natural supplements, stuff that almost everybody can agree is good? Groups like Facebook groups that had millions of members, and they all got purged, they all got taken down. And that really did happen, folks. That really did happen. We got a very long, luxuriously boring flight of an airplane over my head here. I hope you don't hear too much of that in the microphone. This is live, and we got to just go with whatever happens. So, I can only state how bizarre it is that when there's never been such a veritable surfeit of information to gorge yourself on, that's so easily identifiable as truth, because seeing is believing. And you learn certain things and you can't unlearn those things, and you see certain things, and no matter how much you try to wipe your eyes off, you can't unsee certain things. It's not fun. It's not fun to be in this position. I haven't enjoyed being this under the gun because the truth is being prosecuted. And then to find out that we have a technology that can be used to greatly reduce war and crime and terrorism and fatalities and all these horrible things, because that's what we don't want. That's what we stand for at this channel. We do not want you to be violent. We do not want you to do anything to hurt other people at all. In fact, we are very actively seeking the most peaceful way out of this current global, very acrimonious divorce that's going on. Which again, as I said, is not just the debate. It is a deeper divorce that only is symbolized by figureheads, but really has to do with a system that has been in place for a long time, and then an aspect of that system that has broken away and has decided that it does not like the way the system was running. It does not like the morals of the system. It does not like the ethics of that system. These people, who I have called the Alliance, or who I will today call our friends, okay, remember that term, because that's about all you're going to get. Got to be very careful about my wording here, okay? Our friends are many, and I have actually met some of them. And I have been getting briefings on what our friends have had to say since at least 2009, and was already tracking a story long before that. Now, I've said this in other videos. But this is where it really counts, because I'm talking to you. I'm not talking to somebody else. I'm talking to you. And I want you to understand, to the ability that I have within this medium, I want you to understand what might actually be going on. And again, I can't prove everything, because if I did, there's consequences. At this point, there's deep, deep consequences. But let's just say right now that it's a good idea to be digging around and looking for things, and look in unconventional places, and don't be afraid to meander off of the plantation of big tech and social media, okay? Because you just might find a lot more if you don't get constrained by those shackles. Because this has now become something that nobody can ignore. Nobody can deny that this type of ridiculous situation is taking place. And it's really, really sad to me. It's really sad to me as somebody who has been doing this for a long time, that I now am afraid of losing these 433,000 subscribers, losing my ability to speak to you like this, losing this platform that allows me to live stream at a high bandwidth without paying an enormous cost to a large number of people. If you don't go on these platforms, it would be like what would happen to Led Zeppelin if they didn't put anything on the radio. If Stairway to Heaven never got played on the radio, would Led Zeppelin ever have become the biggest rock and roll band of all time? Very likely no. You have to be heard. So this is an attack, and it is very important to remember that the people who are being attacked, the people who are losing their voices, their income is usually tethered to this as well. And so this is a fundamental attack on their livelihood. And if you have the level of arrogance that all you want to do is say, well, they should just get a job, you're missing the point. This is a hostile, intense fight to the death. And getting back to the slides again real quick here, this global acrimonious divorce, if you listen to some of the rhetoric that is being thrown around, we need a fresh start, right? Well, the idea is, oh yeah, okay, I want you to get a fresh start. Let's bring back the old guy. Let's give him another chance, because, I don't know, I'm feeling nostalgic. I just miss those times. And so, it's all going to be different now. It's all going to be better now. Well, this is exactly what happens in dysfunctional relationships. This is exactly what happens, let's go over here, when one person is consistently not being truthful, and then they want another chance and they want another round of forgiveness. It's not like there's a lot to discover here. Okay, this is something that's gone on for a very long time. And so, getting back to the slide again, it kind of reminds me, actually, of what we heard about when I studied battered wife syndrome in psychology classes and counseling classes. After all these years of hitting me, now you send flowers? Folks, yes, that's what I believe is going on, okay? So go ahead and take the channel down. I guess that's what has to happen now. But please, it's so ridiculous. If I can't have an opinion, then is this still America? Or what are we dealing with? So we're supposed to have rights. We're supposed to have the ability to talk about the things we want to talk about, even if they're contentious, and even if some people don't like them, and even if some people are threatened by those things. So when you look at how much things have already happened, the situation that has persisted for so long, unabated, the people who have committed crimes of such enormity and magnitude, who have never before ever had to be accountable for those things. And you hear about it, but there's all these movies that make you think, well, nobody's ever going to be accountable for this. Nobody's ever going to pay for these things. It's preposterous. It's never going to happen. I know you want justice. I know you've wanted justice. And the way in which justice may be coming to you, and I'm only speaking to one part of my audience here, the way that justice may be coming to you could be something that is totally unappealing. You may, and again, a lot of my audience is not going to be this, but you may be looking at a situation in which you have to flick a switch for one of two choices that both seem to be unacceptable to you. And again, this is reductive, but that's what elections are. They reduce it down to one or the other. And then there's some throwaway choices for your vote. But it's reductive. There's one or the other. Okay? So if you got to pick one or the other, and let's say that you're in that boat and you're trying to make up your mind, maybe you're unaware of the threat and the jeopardy that I am under by even trying to talk to you about this right now. That I am risking my entire life's work, my entire career, my entire platform, my ability to earn an income. It's all up in the air right now by even daring to do this and talk to you about this. Now, that would be odd if it were the same thing going in the opposite direction, but it's not. If you want to hate a certain person the way he's been hated for the last 5 years, anything goes, man. You can say anything. You can make any video you want to make. You never have to worry about getting deplatformed as long as you don't go way over into these guidelines and start saying really, really crazy stuff. And there's so many examples of this. But if you carry the opposite opinion, if you talk about certain sources of information, you're going to lose everything. If you talk about certain letters in the English language that might happen to be a certain number after the beginning, perhaps 17, 18, let's say 17 just for fun. certain letters. Clint Eastwood stare. Go ahead. I mean, this is crazy. What's the big deal? You know, the kids don't want to hear about the parents arguing while they're divorcing, right? The kids don't want to get dragged into all the drama. The UFO community doesn't want to get dragged into all the drama. Some of the people that we know, some of the people we trusted in the UFO community turned on us in really, really shocking ways. And it's happened over and over again. There's actually any number of these things that would make you laugh your head off if I could talk about it. And it's so bizarre. Because when you get into this kind of hate, you think about the childishness that it emanates from. Someone who has a significant degree of intelligence, a significant degree of money and power, but is almost completely undeveloped emotionally. And can't get to the most basic appreciation of others. So getting back to the slide again, I really don't take this too metaphorically. I take this pretty much literally. After all these years, now you're going to send flowers? And this time, you say it's going to be better? Okay. So I want to give you some basic information now, because these things are very, very relevant, folks, and you need to know this. Not everybody is the same. We have certain sayings that have become collective gestalts, such as, everyone is a good person at heart. We actually now know through the research of psychology that that is not correct. Certain people are decisively not good at heart. Certain people are consistently abrasive, consistently wanting to get in trouble, wanting to hurt others. They need that fix. And going back to the slide now, we have a name for these people. You might have heard them called narcissists, but psychopath is a common name. Now, psychopath, that's like Hannibal Lecter. That's like somebody who, does all these crazy things. No, not necessarily. That would be an extreme example of a violent psychopath. But you have to understand that the movies have really delighted you with a lot of disinformation about the idea that somebody with these types of characteristics that I'm about to describe would look evil, would have eyes that turn black, or their skin does something funny, or they just look hideous. It's a much less appreciated phenomenon that people with this type of diagnosis blend in to our society. They look like everybody else. They don't have uniquely identifying visual characteristics at all. In fact, the psychopath, and again, we're talking about the non-violent psychopath, which is the vast majority of them. The psychopath is going to deliberately try to be more attractive socially. They're going to want to have a better appearance, better clothes, more money, better job, and they're going to want to rub it in your face. They have delusions of grandeur. They are very into themselves. So you're going to get narcissism. You're going to get ego. You're going to get a lot of pride. You're going to get a lot of lying, manipulation, deceit. These are all the basic characteristics of the psychopath. So a psychopath is a person who, at their core, has some sort of trauma that they've been through, or probably usually it's a whole series of them, that are irreconcilable on some level in their mind. And somewhere along the line, this idea that there is a loving God in the universe, which again, the vast majority of everybody watching this believes that. Okay, that's a common thing in the Western world, and in fact all over the world, regardless of where it is. It's an overwhelmingly high percentage of our audience that believes in a loving God. Okay? Some people think that they have their own set of rules, that karma doesn't apply to them, that they can do whatever the heck they want, and that they are almost like, in some of the more organized forms of this, they're almost like a natural force, like a fire. You can't really blame a fire for burning down an entire area, miles and miles and miles of forest. It's just a fire, that's what it does. Well, you can see I'm being very careful and cagey in how I speak, and I got to tiptoe around things because I used to be able to talk however I want. That right now would definitely not be a good idea. But I want you to think about this idea of psychopaths, okay? And I want you to think about the idea that the psychopath is a person who fundamentally lacks compassion and consideration for others, and they become addicted to manipulation. They become addicted to control. They become addicted to dominance. They need to have a daily hit. They need to hit someone every day. And it doesn't mean necessarily physically. That's a violent one, but there's a lot of nonviolent ones. So how do you know that you're in a situation like this with a person? You're always in trouble. You're always saying you're sorry. You're always apologizing. There's always a big, horrible problem, and it's always your fault. And I also have seen many people going through this as a life lesson, that this is their lesson. This is what they have to go through, is to be in one of these and then figure out how to get out. And having studied this in college academically, actually how battered wives can leave alcoholic, battering husbands, it's very, very bizarre. It doesn't follow the rules that you think it would follow. Getting away can be extremely difficult and extremely painful and nearly impossible. Because part of what happens is that you are told that you do not have any value without this person, that without this person everything's going to go down the toilet, that you need them. You need them to be able to live. And one of the things psychopaths love to do is to make you dependent on them, financially, physically, for whatever reason, so that it actually is true, so that you could be fooled into believing that you have nothing to fall back on, that you couldn't leave, that you are trapped, that this is a paradox. But getting into the spiritual information that I've shared for so many years, I don't believe in paradoxes. There always is a way that you can get out of a situation that you don't like. There always is a way that you can be free. There always is a way that you can escape a situation. But in the most extreme versions of psychopathic relationships, which I have gotten to learn about through a variety of means, including that I worked for 8 years as a personal intuitive consultant. I had 500 clients during that time, and I would talk to people one-on-one on the phone for usually a 90-minute session, 2 sides of a 90-minute cassette tape, 45 minutes of conversation, 45 minutes of the intuitive consultation. And what I would hear about is a lot of these kinds of things, because believe it or not, if you are on the ascension path, if you're on a spiritual path and you're awakening, it is very, very likely that you have attracted psychopaths into your life who are actively lying to you, manipulating you, withholding information from you, hurting you, making you feel bad, and overall becoming a very, very disruptive menace to your life. I have always striven to be the best person I can be. That's why after being a public figure since 1996, I've been posting online since then. It's 25 years, okay? Beginning in Richard C. Hoagland's discussion forum on enterprisemission.com in March or April 1996 is when I started, okay? And writing articles and then competing with other people to see who's got read. That was the hot forum back in the day. 1996, Art Bell, 20 million people listening per show, and Richard was the top guest, and then George Norrie took over. And as I said, George Norrie never gets involved in these types of flame wars. Well, I went into Hoagland's forum back in 96 being very excited about this information he was sharing, seeing actually really compelling photographic evidence of what appear to be intelligently built, human-built ruins on another planet in our solar system, on Mars. That there's this face that looks like a face, that actually has a headdress around it. It's 1.5 miles wide. And then next to that very unusual feature is what clearly looks like a series of pyramids in a city. And then right below that, in a perfect triangulation, is a 5-sided pyramid. But this 5-sided pyramid has the proportions of the human body with its arms out. like the Vitruvian Man. Okay? Now, I was very interested in the idea that this might be true, as I'm sure many people would be. NASA came out with absurdly doctored false images that Art Bell dubbed the cat box because they actually washed out all the contrast on the image to try to make it look like there wasn't a face there. And then we went in and we tweaked the contrast and figured out, no, here's all the blacks and all the stuff, all the differences in black color that we could find when we actually just boost the contrast back up. They've never really gone back and tried to do anything like that again. And I actually do believe, as I wrote in my third book, Ascension Mysteries, that there are ruins on Mars. You could also watch previous YouTube videos I've done on this channel, youtube.com/DavidWilcock333. I don't have very many videos, but some of them do talk about this. And also, there's 2 movies that I've been in recently. There's Above Majestic and Cosmic Secret. And right now, I'd highly recommend watching either one of them. Let's just put that out there. Oh, and we got 10,900 live viewers right now, so it's working. That's good. So, focusing on this now, what I'd like to do is have you consider this idea that I've been doing this since 1996. I was doing this with Richard C. Hoagland's discussion forum back when that was the hippest place to be in the UFO community. And right at the beginning, I saw the dawning of what we now call trolling on the internet. I saw certain individuals who never, ever, ever stopped attacking Richard and attacking his information. And then what I also noticed is something that in philosophy is called intellectual dishonesty, where when you prove a point, they don't accept it and they just change to something else. So this is where you get the term perma-skeptic. That's one of the things I used. It's not about winning an argument with these people. It's about them wanting to attack you. Well, that is psychopathic by definition. There is an epidemic of psychopathology on the internet. You are going to be attacked if you try to go public, if you try to make a statement, if you do anything that people start paying attention to. The way the world is today, the way the internet is today, you will be attacked as soon as you start getting any kind of decent numbers. And that's across the board for everybody. So this is everybody's problem. And the social media has potentially made everyone an instant overnight celebrity. You could go viral for any reason. You don't even know. You could post some kind of funny video, and the next thing you know, 2 million people have seen it the following day. And there are many, many, many stories that have been written, many articles that have been written about how this happens to people and how they end up wanting to kill themselves, and they end up canceling their page and canceling their social media, and they never do another thing again. And they hide out, and they spend the rest of their lives recovering from the trauma of what happens to you when you go public like this. So the psychopath epidemic is very real. Now in psychology back in the early 1990s, we were taught that it's 4% of men and 2% of women that are psychopathic. And again, all this means is that there is a systematic, profound, ongoing lack of empathy for others and an ongoing desire to manipulate, control, and enslave and dominate others. So by talking to people as a consultant, by talking to people, 500 clients over the course of 8 years, I had many, many people who were in extremely toxic, destructive relationships, marriages, and even just boyfriend-girlfriend. So I got to analyze this stuff, and I got to talk to many people about their most personal issues. And one of the things that I found out was that in a lot of these cases, not all of them, but in the worst cases, the psychopath, the attacker, the person who is causing all the problems, ultimately will say, if you don't let me do this, I will kill you. If you don't stay with me, I will kill you. If you leave me, I will kill you or I will kill myself. Now that's very, very sad when someone is in a relationship and they don't want to be in that relationship anymore, but they are told that they're going to be killed if they try to get out, or that the other person will kill themselves. Sadly, this is actually quite common, and I heard about it from many of my former clients. Why do people use this suicide embargo? Well, a psychopath becomes dependent upon the loop that takes place. They want to traumatize, and they want to receive the benefit. So you got to remember, if you're not a psychopath, if this is mysterious to you, psychopaths, how do I say this in an interesting way? They don't really have anything else going on that matters as much as being a psychopath. That's the only thing that really matters. It's like a religion. And they need to do it. They need to do it regularly. They need to be, on a daily basis, dominating, terrifying, controlling, manipulating, deceiving another person. They need that daily experience of venting on someone, attacking someone, hurting someone, and then getting the apologies and getting the fear and getting the contractive response where you actually do start to slouch and lean forward. So if you still don't really understand that not everyone is a good person at heart, that there are these types of people walking around, and some of them are nonviolent. It's a problem in the spiritual community as well, which I avoided it, but this is not very common. A lot of people in the spiritual community that I've heard about have actually been womanizers. And they have taken advantage of people because of their public persona, because of the degree of exposure that they have. So let me again reiterate that I am happily married to Elizabeth, and I've never done that. Okay, so rumors always get started up again, and those rumors do not have anything to do with me. And they're never going to. Why? Because for me, I never have been that motivated by this. If you have a spiritually integrated life, you don't have a sexual hunger that is always needing to be filled. You don't have a desire to want to mate with people who you don't plan on spending the rest of your life with them in a monogamous relationship. And so this idea of cheating, this idea of, the deception and going behind somebody's back and the secret texts and the secret phone calls, let me share something with you. Even if you don't believe in karma, even if you don't believe in a benevolent, loving God, or that benevolent, loving God has it in for you if you start doing negative things, in today's age, with the way, and I'm so slouchy here in this camera angle, it's not the best, most flattering one. This is from the Daily Mail. And it says, the scientist who found that he had the brain of a psychopath and what it taught him about human nature. James Fallon, interestingly like Jimmy Fallon, right, the late night talk show host, there's no possible synchronicity there. James Fallon was studying brain scans when he made this discovery. Then he later realized his family is related to the infamous suspected parent killer Lizzie Borden. After coming to terms with this news, Mr. Fallon has written a book, and he believes that the love of his family prevented him from having dangerous behaviors. Okay, it's against yourself. This man was able to see that he had impulses that would lead to dangerous behaviors, and that he was able to stop those dangerous behaviors from actually happening. There's a reason why psychopaths should never drink alcohol, because alcoholism and psychopathy are very fundamentally related, and a psychopath under the influence of alcohol becomes vastly, vastly, vastly worse. So I'll just put that out there. Now, here's the next slide I want you to see. This is James Fallon on the right. Now notice that he doesn't look like anything unusual. He doesn't have an appearance that would suggest he's evil. You wouldn't see this guy and go, uh-oh, I better run away from this guy. He looks happy. He looks fun. He looks like a guy you could, drink with and have fun with and hang out, and he'd be your buddy. But now what's that on the left? What that on the left is showing you, if you didn't already know this, you really do need to know this now, that you're at the end of the line of being able to ignore psychopaths. You're going to have to know that these people exist. The exam is over. It's time to know. And you're going to know the truth, folks. That is about to happen. And it has started already. Even though I can't tell you, you're going to learn about it anyway. And all those deleted channels are coming back, by the way. Hopefully soon. So what do we see on Jim's brain there, down on the bottom? Where is the frontal lobe? It's on the right. That's where the red arrow is. The frontal lobe is the part of your brain that processes feelings and emotions. Emotions like loving someone, kindness, patience, forgiveness. This is the front of the brain. Your frontal lobe processes things like self-consciousness, whether you feel anxious about yourself, whether you feel awkward. All of those kind of emotions that would lead to you not wanting to get up on stage and talk to a bunch of people. All those emotions that say, oh my God, I had a little stuttering when I was a kid. Now I don't want people to know that I might still stutter. I'm all worried about it. That's overactive frontal lobe. Okay, if your frontal lobe is going nuts, if your frontal lobe is too active, then what's going to happen is that you are going to be neurotic, or whatever you want to call it in psychology, where you are questioning everything that you do. You're always having self-conscious thoughts. You're constantly worried about what other people say about you, what other people think about you. And then, here's what can happen. You might end up in a situation where you have been traumatized very, very greatly and very repeatedly. And it may be that over the course of many repeated examples of this trauma, that some people's minds voluntarily turn off the frontal lobe. They turn it off. This is a biological defense mechanism. It is a response to trauma. It is a protective mechanism against trauma. Your brain does this for you. If you go through too many of these emotional upsets, if you go through too much emotional pain, your body will start to shut off the frontal lobes. And the more that goes on, the more it snowballs with additional traumas. So if you're in a highly abusive environment for years on end, your brain will actually deactivate the frontal lobes. And there are usually going to be, now this gets into a version of psychotherapy called somatic experience, because you don't want your brain to do this. You do want your frontal lobes to be activated. So what is somatic experiencing? Somatic experiencing is a technique that has proven to be effective because it gets results. So let's talk about some interesting things that we learn from the animal kingdom. And there is a guy who did this work. I forget the name of the scientist off the top of my head because I don't have slides for this, but this is all part of the psychopath discussion when we double click on it. In the animal kingdom, it has been observed that when animals get into a fight to the death, when they have that fight to the death, or when they almost have a fight to the death, when something deeply, intensely traumatic and upsetting happens to them, they will eventually go to a safe place in many, many cases, and then they will have tremors. Their body starts shaking, and they have tremors, and that, in the somatic experiencing lexicon, is called a release. Okay? There are films of this with polar bears. Two polar bears get into a fight. The polar bear that was in the fight, they track him. He goes off to an area after this fight. He's all scratched up. And he starts shaking. And I would say that this is something that we have lost. But in somatic experiencing, they call it a release. Now, a release as a human being doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have traumatic shaking in your body. It can. And in the sexual experience, a lot of times, the sexual release is... But this is not the only way, and it's not something that you have to be dependent upon. There are plenty of ways that don't involve being in a relationship that you can still release this stuff. So in somatic experiencing, what happens is that you are asked to hold a traumatic memory, and you don't even have to say what it is. You don't even have to give the therapist the memory. And then they say, now go inside your body and tell me where you feel this. What part of your body are you feeling? What part of your body are you noticing right now? And what can you tell me about it? And the strangest thing begins to happen. Your attentiveness will pivot to a certain part of your body that actually starts to feel pain in a lot of cases. And that pain is associated with a memory. And then you might actually start crying. You don't have to say what the memory is out loud, but in the process of going into the pain, you discover that there is an anchor point between a physical trauma and a part of the body. And so without getting into details, there are certain times in my life where I experienced some physical violence. Thankfully, it was never that bad. But in certain somatic experiencing events, I was asked to tune into a memory and ask where does my attention go? And I go to a certain part of my body, and then I realize that I actually was injured there. And that this is like a somatic memory. If you haven't healed this, your brain is eventually going to deactivate the frontal lobes. So that there's not the electrical activity there, which means you're not burdened anymore by worrying about what people are going to think about you. You're not burdened by fear. You don't even have a healthy fear necessarily. You'll just do what you want. You don't think about how other people are going to feel based on your actions. You don't think about what they're going to do. You don't worry about consequences. You don't worry about getting caught. You don't worry about going to jail. You think you're going to be able to talk your way out of it. You think that everything's cool. You're fine. This is not normal. The brain is not meant to run without a frontal lobe. And if you don't use your frontal lobe, you're missing out on a lot of the joy of living. Because you're never really going to feel love. You're never really going to feel warmth. You're never really going to feel happiness. The only happiness that you get in the psychopathic arena is by hurting people, controlling them, manipulating them. And it's very difficult to really grasp that this could happen. But going back to the slide now, here is the brain on the left of a normal person with a frontal lobe. There are websites that can teach you about this, like the psychopathfree.com website. And before we get into that, let's go over here. I just want to say that psychopathfree.com, I've never talked about it in a video before, I don't think, or maybe I did once or twice. But for me, it is the gold standard of websites that discuss how to actually, the practical advice of how to unhook from a psychopath. Because again, the sad reality, if you haven't gotten into one of these, I'm so grateful that this has never happened to you. But when death is the only way out, when somebody's going to die, it's you or the other person or both. You know, when I grew up in Scotia, New York, right down the street from me, there was a family where the husband came home, shot the wife with a shotgun after she had divorced him and he had moved out. He came back with a gun. He shot her and killed her, and then he shot himself and killed himself. And that was 4 doors down from my house. And I guess when it finally happened was the early 80s. So this stuff does happen. There are these situations where people literally cannot get out. And something bad does happen. And what's going on right now sure sounds an awful lot like that, doesn't it? That there's going to be these horrible things that will happen after the election, if it turns out a certain way. Or maybe even if it doesn't. Maybe no matter how the thing turns out, maybe no matter which way the wind blows, it's all going to go that way. We also have a picture up there, by the way, on the... So, this is how it works in the real world. The real world is not nice, the real world is not fun, the real world is very, very messy. And if you get entangled with psychopaths, they're always trying to make you doubt yourself, they're always trying to make you doubt your intuition, doubt your heart, doubt what you really are thinking and feeling inside. And there are many, many people over the eons, over the millennia, throughout all the known inhabited worlds in this galaxy alone. You know, NASA's now saying that there's something like 80 million Earth-like planets in our galaxy alone. Or I think it's 80 billion, actually, now. It's 80 billion, yeah. So that's just a staggering number. I mean, you know, the number of Earth-like planets is so common that it's pretty much like almost every star has a watery Earth-like planet. So I would wager that we're going to find out that intelligent life is very, very common in the universe and that it follows an intelligent design. That intelligent design is what we would call the logos. It's the mind of the galaxy. I talk all about this. Here it comes, everybody. Kaboom! In the new book, Awakening in the Dream. Part of the reason why I haven't been talking very much is that this book is still current. There's still things in this book that haven't happened yet. It tells you the future. And it tells you how this thing that we're going through right now is going to work out. And I stand behind it. There's a lot of things in here that I wouldn't even want to talk about right now because it could cause the channel to go down very easily. But it's already in the book. And remember, I finished the book in January, so I didn't know about any of this stuff that's happened since then. But the whole book is written for a person going through an economic collapse, basically. And how you cope with that and how you deal with that reality, which is now basically everybody's reality. So the psychopath is a person who, throughout all the different worlds in our galaxy and beyond, everybody's been cracking on this, trying to figure out, is there a way that I can make my psychopath love me? Is there a way that I can force this person to be the way that I want them to be? If I'm nice enough, if I'm loving enough, if I'm patient enough, if I'm forgiving enough, if I give them enough benefit of the doubt. What does, going back to the slide real quick, what does the psychopathfree.com website say about this? They actually make it very clear. The only protocol that works with a psychopath is no contact. Now, what does this mean exactly? This means no matter how many ways you try to solve this Rubik's Cube and all the different, you're never going to be able to make this work if it's a real, what I would call a pure psychopath. Because there's people are on a spectrum. There's a psychopathic spectrum. This is my observation. The farther down they are on that spectrum towards the incurable part, the more you need to practice no contact. Now, what does that actually mean? It means anything that you say draws you back in. Any response that you make draws you back in. This person is going to constantly try to reaccess you. They're going to keep sending you letters. They're going to keep sending you texts. They're going to keep trying to call. They're going to show up wherever you want to go. They're going to talk to the people you know. They're going to say lies about you, horrible things about you. They're going to spread it to everybody they know. And this is painful because this has happened to me more often than I care to admit. And so after all of these years and studying this and applying it personally, I can honestly say, just like the slide says, the only protocol that works is no contact. Now, why is that? Because the psychopath's only goal is to be psychopathic. If they can apologize to you and have you believe it, and then they can go back to doing what they were already doing once they've groomed you again, they will gladly do that. So most psychopaths will never apologize, but if they do, it's coming out of manipulation. So they will do whatever it takes to continue to have this situation develop, which is basically that you're always in trouble, you're always apologizing, you're always saying you're sorry, it's very complicated, and you are going out of your way to try to change your behavior, to try to change these things about yourself that the person tells you, nobody else will love you. Nobody else will love you but me. I'm the only one that you can trust. I'm the only one that you can rely on. Nobody else would put up with you but me. Now this is very, very sad, but it's also very, very personal. And that's why what I'm saying to you is that this is the background, this is the tradecraft behind this idea that there is a global acrimonious divorce going on. And the children are being dragged into the divorce. And again, please don't get stuck on the idea that this is only a divorce between maybe a couple of people on one side and one guy on the other side. One guy who's been hated for 5 years nonstop like a bulldozer, a blanket of nonstop coverage that never gives any other view, never has anything nice to say, and has been caught lying thousands of times, making up the most outlandish, ridiculous stuff, and how weird it is that we can't really talk about it. And that there's people who believe it. There's people who the psychopath has manipulated to such a degree that they believe the lie more than what their own eyes will see. That somebody would actually think it's a good idea to have information withheld from you, that you don't even get to survey the information, you don't even get to decide So that if anybody talks about this person that's been hated for 5 years in any type of supportive way, you could just lose your whole platform. It's that easy. That's all you have to do. That kind of totalitarianism that's being supported by an entire institution in vertical integration. We're talking about mainstream media. We're talking about social media. We're talking about the very nature of the system that is supposed to be for the people, of the people, and by the people. A public interacting, a public location where we assemble. Freedom of assembly is one of the freedoms gathered in the Constitution. That's gone. Freedom of speech, that's gone. Okay? You don't have the right to assemble. Freedom of assembly should be protected, meaning, barring some very egregious violations, you shouldn't be having your channels taken down. And I know that they're looking for any excuse to do it to me. That's why this might be the last show. So I waited until the night before because I want to use this global meditation technology to get something done that's done right. So again, going back to the slide one more time, I hate to be so repetitive, but this is really important. The only protocol that works is no contact. And this is on the psychopathfree.com website. Now here it is. If you look at this website, you type in psychopathfree.com, this is what you're going to see. So it used to be a discussion forum. It says new registrations are permanently closed. Obviously, the trolling phenomenon happened. She could only handle it for so long. I assume it's a woman. I don't know for sure. I think the tone is a woman. The author of PF is writing a new book. Please click here to learn more. Now, what you have to do at this point is scroll down to the bottom, because this is where all the good juice is, folks. And you have to go down to the very bottom of the page where it says Psychopath Free Library. Okay? And it says right there, a collection of member-contributed articles complete with a commenting system that integrates fully with the forum. Administrators will manually promote helpful forum posts to the library with your approval. So, I mean, that's how it started. Obviously, now she's not doing it anymore. But this is the library page, which is psychopathfree.com/articles. So you got to go to the bottom, click on this. Now, this is where all sociopathic or narcissistic relationship, how do we get back to our true self? And then it says, I can barely read it on this little screen here. It also says below that, healing complex PTSD after emotional wounding. There is hope and relief for those who have survived a toxic relationship, betrayal, infidelity, silent treatment, manipulation, and gaslighting. The infamous gaslighting word, which Elizabeth hates that word, by the way, wishes that we never use it, but I'll just explain it because you're probably going to hear it a lot. Gaslighting is a reference to a movie, I think it was from the 1930s, in which there was a guy who was convincing people in a house that it was haunted by the lights turning on and off. So it's really scary when the lights are turning on and off and you think that there's a spirit involved and everybody gets scared and everybody's freaked out. The lights, by the way, happen to be lights that were running with a gas, so it's called gaslighting, okay? Because he, at the end of the movie, you find out that he is the one turning the lights on and off and making them think that there's a ghost. And this is the Scooby-Doo effect, right? What always happens at the end of every episode of a Scooby-Doo cartoon? I should know, because I'm born 1973. I watched probably all of them. It would have been fine if it wasn't for you meddling kids. Right? The guy is not, it's not a ghost, it's not a monster. Scooby thinks that it's a monster, you know, oh, give me Scooby snacks. At the end of the show, they always figure out that it's just a guy and he's dressed up in a costume and he is gaslighting. He's been gaslighting whoever the heck they, you know, wherever they were. It's the same story. So what's really going on, in my view, is that we have a global Scooby-Doo movie taking place right now. And we're almost at the point that a whole lot of things that look like they have nothing to do with anything, you're going to have this mask ripped off, and you're going to find out that there was a guy. Oh, we know a guy. We got a guy. There's a guy. And this guy is doing this stuff. And he's really doing this. When social media and mainstream media work as a block, BLOC, when they work as a unit, when they comprise in vertical integration, when companies are vertically integrated, controlled from the top with one agenda, That is a very significant thing. Let's never forget the work of the Swiss scientist Dr. James Glatfelder, who analyzed 48,030 transnational corporations in a database called Orbis 2007, I believe it was. It was the 2007 version. And he looked at all the transnational corporations in the world. There's about 48,000 of them. And he looked to find, with a supercomputer using fuzzy logic, if there was a hidden connection between these different companies. And this includes like shared members on the board of directors. Okay? Stuff that's not necessarily obvious. That people are married to each other and they're in different components of the same thing. Per entity of only 147 corporations. And of those 147 corporations, he published the list of the top 50. 2/3 of that top 50 are the too big to fail banks. So there's something somehow interrelated with the too big to fail banks. It is an irrefutable fact, around the time of 2008, that this entire system collapsed. This entire system fell flat on its face, and the only way that it came back to life was with the narcissistic abuse of the human population on Earth. The bailout of $29 trillion, of which, by the way, the gross world product, or GWP, the total amount of money in the world at this time, was only like $58 trillion. So if you print $29 trillion out of thin air, you've stolen more than half of all the money in the world. Dr. James Glatfelder is showing you something that was also confirmed with the LIBOR scandal. You have all these apparently different banks. Go look it up if you can still find it, if they haven't gotten rid of it yet. If you remember this, it's very important right now. All the top too big to fail banks were actually cheating and working against each other, but working for each other. Appearing to work against each other, making side deals on who was going to be winning and who was going to be losing, and whose credit goes up and whose credit goes down. And this system was just teetering ever since then. You have an entire generation that, as of right now, doesn't have hope. Doesn't have hope for their future. Doesn't have hope that the traditional system that people in my generation, my wife's generation, and how do people tolerate that? How do people deal with that? It makes you psychopathic in many cases, and you go online and you start hating people. Because you're trying to reconcile some irreconcilable grief. So I guess we have a question from the audience that we can ask about right now. Why don't you throw that down on the floor, and I'll know to look at that when the time comes. Thank you. I want to jump to something else first before this, but when we have that kind of a situation, that kind of a total breakdown in our society, you can't really hide it. There isn't a future to look forward to for a lot of people. And that's the way it was before this dreaded year. The year that is supposed to be a number corresponding to having clear, because it's going to become common. When they say the lady doth protest too much, right? What happens when a psychopath is about to get caught? They start telling everybody you know that you're an asshole. They start trying to go after everything in your life. So when they're about to get caught, they attack you. So isn't it interesting that this thing that I've been talking about with our friends, what our friends are doing, what our friends started to tell me about back in 2009, an unbelievably massive international effort. Forget about the guy that's been hated for the last 5 years for just a minute. This is not just him. This has actually very little to do with him, although I believe that what has been done is amazing and is heroic. Okay? For many, many reasons. Society hasn't accepted on a global level yet what is actually going on in humanity. And I would actually say no. What I'm saying is most people are not psychopathic, but if you have an unusual number of them with this kind of characteristic coming into your life, then there might be something in you that allows this to happen. And there is a name for that. It's called codependency. So another thing that I think we are all dealing with on a global level right now is the codependent addiction. Now for me, getting off of alcohol and mind-altering drugs in 1992, because I had a serious problem at that time, getting off of alcohol and mind-altering drugs was easy. I actually quit cold turkey, and I didn't go and I didn't relapse. I was able to just stay off of it. But codependency was vastly, vastly, vastly more difficult for me to recover from. Now, what is codependency? Codependency is where you literally are dependent upon having other people in your life. And without other people in your life, you fall apart. And so you cannot have a relationship end without immediately getting another one. You have to be involved with someone. You have to be in love. You have to be in a relationship. You can't handle not being in a relationship. And I understand the particulars of this, right? A beautiful woman, for example, probably doesn't want to not be in a relationship, because she's going to get hit on all the time, everywhere she goes. And when you can say, I have a boyfriend, that's the instant get out of jail free card. You don't have to deal with any of the other stuff. I have a boyfriend, or I'm married, either one. But when we're dealing with the real debilitating aspect of codependency, what does this mean? This means that you are addicted to giving yourself away to other people. You're addicted to trying to convince someone who doesn't love you that they should change. So you seek out the unwinnable. You seek out people who are not going to change. You seek out people who are not going to get any better. They're not going to treat you better. They're not going to be nicer to you or anything. And you are trying, and you're addicted to getting them to change. And you're hoping that this time they're going to change. Well, I had codependency going on for a very long time.